Well, hey there, everybody, and welcome to another episode of The Unlocked Show. I'm your host, Tracy Wilson, and it's my pleasure to be here with you guys today on, I'm going to say, a little dreary Wednesday morning here on the Gold Coast. We have had a huge amount of rain, and I'm hoping that the rain will stay away for our poor friends down in the southern states of, northern New South Wales and southern Queensland, because they have absolutely been hammered over the last couple of weeks. But needless to say, I'm excited about today's conversation because I have got the amazing David Fivecoat here with me today, and we're going to be talking all things grit. So for those of you who have set often lofty goals and then wondered, why the heck have I not been able to achieve those? What I want to find out from David today is, how do you do that? Let me tell you a little bit about him, because his background has certainly prepared him to move into the entrepreneurial and the corporate space, to be able to help people really find that grit within, to enable them to build the kind of momentum that you need to accomplish even your grittiest goals in life. So being someone who, 24 years in the US Army as a paratrooper, as well as serving on 4 combat tours throughout Iraq, Afghanistan, being a colonel in the US Army, now retired, and he's actually founded the consulting group Fivecoat Consulting Group. He now does a lot of blogging, he speaks, and he coaches gritty leaders on how to develop the gritty organizations, or how to develop the grit within us to enable us to achieve any goal that we set without petering out along the way. So I know that this conversation that we're going to have with him today is really going to be useful for you guys. It's going to be useful in the sense that he's going to give you some very practical steps and experiences that he's had over the years that have really helped him, and also all of the people that he has since coached since coming out of the Army, in how to accomplish any goal that they set. So welcome to the show, David. It's fantastic to have you here.
Tracy, thank you for having me, and I'm excited to be on the show. I was lucky enough to visit both Brisbane and Sydney about 20 years ago, and really had a phenomenal time. Got to run all over Sydney and see the great things that they have there, and then took the train up to Brisbane, and really got to see a little bit of the coast there too.
Oh, good. Well, you would have probably driven right past my home. So, fantastic that you've been here. It's changed somewhat over the last 20 years. Probably a heck of a lot more populated than it was way back then. But saying that's great that you've been here, you've seen, and you know this neck of the woods. So tell us a little bit about your background in particular. Being a paratrooper, and how that experience of being in the Army has really, how you've taken that experience and then turned that into the thriving business that you've got today, where you're helping other entrepreneurs and business owners really find the grit within them.
Yeah, Tracy. I grew up in a small farming community in Ohio, which is in the central part of the United States. And I loved reading about military history. I read about, and especially World War II, and I liked reading about both the Pacific theater and the European theater. And when it came time to apply to colleges, a natural fit for me was to apply to West Point, which is the United States Military Academy. I applied and got in and decided to go, and then pursued a career in the U.S. Army for the next 24 years. I was lucky enough to attend the United States Army's Ranger School, which is the premier small unit leadership school. And we'll talk a little bit more about that, because it requires a lot of grit to be successful at, and to actually meet the standards which are demanding. And only about half the folks that attend this school actually graduate. And then went off and served in a variety of assignments throughout the United States Army in both the 82nd Airborne Division, the 101st Airborne Division, and eventually culminated my career by leading the United States Army's Ranger School and Airborne School. And while I was in charge of the Ranger School, we actually led the gender integration of Ranger School. So Ranger School been in existence since 1952, about 80,000 male grads, and the first 3 women came to Ranger School and graduated. Since then, it's now been 6 years. There's been another 97 women that have graduated. So there's been right at 100 women that have graduated from the United States Army's Ranger School. So
That's
after that
awesome.
career and that experience, and like you said in the intro, I did 3 trips to Iraq, including the invasion of Iraq, and then took a battalion to Afghanistan in 2010 and 11. And I know some of the Australian service members out there that might be listening to it did some time in Afghanistan. I think the special forces or the Special Air
Hmm.
Service from Australia did the invasion of Iraq as well. But I took that experience and I transitioned. There's not a whole lot of your audience, I think, that does a complete career transition at the age of, in my case, I was 43, and I transitioned from 28 years in the Army, including West Point, 24 years active duty, and then had to completely change to a completely different career. And I initially landed at another company run by some veterans that did some leadership training for folks here in the United States and overseas. And after about 3 years, at the beginning of COVID, I decided that it was time to start my own company. And I like to
Mm.
joke that I wasn't being gritty enough, so I decided that I needed to start my own company on the cusp of the pandemic. And so
Well, good,
founded the
good for
company
you.
in oh thanks, founded the company in March of 20, and had some as many of your entrepreneurs out there have had the experience, some soul searching, some sleepless nights as you stand up a company. I went a whole quarter without getting a client, but managed to persevere, managed to apply my grit, and now have a thriving company that does both executive coaching and leadership training here in 2022.
Well, that's fantastic, and I love that story. Like you say, well, I think we think that there's not a lot of people that kind of get to our age and go, maybe I need to do this complete, 180 and do something completely different. But the number of entrepreneurs that I speak to, they kind of get to that period of their life and go, hang on a minute, I want to do something a little bit different. But, doing that in the middle of a pandemic, when all the noise and the conversations are, gosh, things are getting tough, it's not a good time to be starting a business or anything like that in that moment. And then for somebody like you to go, well, what the heck, I've got to go, I set out to do this. It's something that I wanted to do. I want to make a real change in my life. And then actually just applying yourself in that moment to achieve what you have today, and to go a whole quarter, with probably wondering what the heck have I done? Like what moving from a solid paycheck to something that in the entrepreneurial space can be quite erratic, with lots of ups and downs, but then going that entire quarter with nothing really does take some grit within somebody to persevere and keep going. So let's talk about that, because I know that a lot of people would have given up at that time. They would have thought, gosh, am I really cut out for this? They let the self chatter get the better of them, and all of a sudden, running back to their 9 to 5 job. And I can attest to that. I've been there, done that. Thought, gosh, I need to go back and get a job. It's much easier just to have a 9 to 5 and get a regular paycheck. But what was it that you did during that time that just kept you moving forward?
Yeah. So I've told lots of people, and I think your entrepreneurs and small business owners will get it. But despite my experiences in combat, the experience of standing up my own business and getting it going was actually a heck of a lot scarier. When you go from having a regular paycheck to no paycheck, and unless you make that sale, unless you bring those folks in the front door and close that deal, you might not keep the lights on. And so it was an
Mm.
extremely scary proposition. It feels a lot like so on the cover of my book as a parachutist, I did 102 parachute jumps during my career. It feels like a lot, as you stand up a business, you're like exiting that aircraft at 1,000 feet, and you're
Mm.
hoping your parachute opens. You hope you have a soft landing, but the winds could change. You could get blown off course. The big thing that really helped me, and I hope this helps some of the folks that are listening today, is I found that the thing that worked for me was to bound it by a year. And I said, hey, I'm going to be all in on this entrepreneur thing, try to stand up the business. And I found it in March of 2020. And I said, hey, in March of 21, I will take an assessment. And if it's been successful, I will continue. If it has not been successful, I'll say, okay, I gave it my shot. I gave it the best that I could do. And maybe I'm not cut out for this, and I'll put my resume out and go back to a 9 to 5 and a regular paycheck. But flashback to March of 21, and things were going really well. I had hit and got a business consulting contract that was running for another couple of months. Things looked pretty good, and I said, okay, I'll try it for one more year. And now we're coming up to the end of March of 22, and things are going really well. So I think I'll continue it for another year. But that's to me how I manage my fear as being that small business owner, of saying, hey, I'll just do it for a year and then see what happens.
I'm kind of listening to what you're saying, and I'm thinking, gosh, being in the army and going into some pretty scary places, and comparing that with starting your own business, having done it for a number of times, I'm like, gosh, I think I would be way more fearful of of stepping into some of those scary places that you've certainly been. But that concept of, all right, I'm going to give this a crack. I'm going to give this a red hot go. I'm going to go all in, burn the bridges, so to speak, and I'm going to give it some form of, time. I'm going to give a time limit on it. Is a smart thing to do, and without knowing sort of your family background, but I'm wondering, when you talked about when you did that, obviously, as entrepreneurs and moving out of a 9 to 5 job, there's often other people other than ourselves. Even if we're not married and we don't have children, we still have, a community that is normally looking at us going, what the heck are you doing? How did you actually communicate that? And what difference did the fact that you put a time frame on it make to those around you, those significant people?
Yeah, so I've got a 12-year-old daughter, and we talked about it and said, hey, I'm going to take this risk. I'm going to take this, and I think she sort of intuitively, at that point in time, she was 10, sort of understood intuitively, when I was going a whole quarter without a client, she could feel the stress level rising, and we had a couple of good talks about it. But eventually, as I came out of it, we also had a really good talk on, like, hey, there's one thing that, I talked to her and I said, hey, there's one thing that you've got to sort of acknowledge, that your father took a huge risk during this pandemic to start a company and get it going, and really, get it going from the ground up. And so I hope she takes that experience fast forward in another 20 or 30 years, and maybe she'll start her own company just because she saw, one of her parents, give it a shot and have a little bit of success. My parents
I have
weren't
no doubt about that.
Yeah.
I'm sure, by watching and seeing Dad, take the risk, but a calculated risk, right? Like, when you're jumping out of an airplane at, however many feet, and hoping like heck that the parachute opens, it's all a very calculated process. So I'm sure you took that, into your entrepreneurship, and she's seeing you do that, which, in my opinion, is the best lessons that we can really share with our children, right? Is for them to actually see us doing something rather than just saying, hey, go and do X, Y, Z. So yeah, what a great thing for her to be able to, watch.
Yeah. Yeah. And my parents weren't entrepreneurs. It sounds like maybe your parents were. Dad was a math teacher. My mom worked in computers in a couple of different companies. And so didn't really have that entrepreneurial background. So it was a huge leap of that. One of the other things that I did, I think that really helps, and I think some of your folks could find some utility out of this, is also is I took I sat down and I got a piece of paper out and I said, okay, I'm going to take a list and make a list of all the things, all my fears and all the things that are kind
Mm,
of holding me back on this, on why not to do this. And I listed those fears out, and then I listed, what's the worst thing that could happen out of it. And, like, hey, start my own business. Worst thing that could happen. Hey, I don't get any clients. And then I put on a third column, I was like, okay, now I have to think through what's my one thing I can do to help put a mitigation strategy in to kind of
mm,
help that. And one of them was that year bounding and saying, okay, that taking that year. Another thing that I took a sales class because I was uncertain that I was going to be able to make sales, and that was helpful to think about the sales process because I'd never done sales. Sure, you're always selling, no matter what business you're
mhm,
in, but in the formal, actually get somebody to sign a statement of work and pass along an invoice and get them to sign that and actually get it to accounts payable. A big shock to me as somebody that had always been in government was I didn't understand that companies pay 30, 60, or 90 days in arrears. And I'm
mhm,
like, what the heck? I go to the gas station and I pay for gas and they want me to pay for it right then.
mhm.
But they're not going to pay me for my work for 60 or 90 days. That's a big challenge. So that was another shock to the system.
Well, that is and it's interesting because actually one of our viewers was asking, what do you do to manage your fears at that time? So that process of actually just taking some time to sit down and think about the worst case scenario, like what ifs, to get them off of the table, out of the way, and knowing that you have explored all of the different possibilities that could happen, but then actually putting in some form of risk mitigation plan to say, well, it doesn't really matter because I've got a again, I'm going to liken this to you jumping out of an aircraft or a helicopter, with a parachute. The parachute doesn't open. What do? You go to plan B. In your environment, you would always have a worst case scenario plan B, and it sounds as if you've certainly taken a lot of those experiences that you've had and have really adapted those into this world of entrepreneurship, which I think is fantastic. And that particular, it's interesting that you should talk about that whole, concept of thinking about the worst case scenario, because I had a client a couple of years ago that was just super stuck in her own world of, oh my God, this is going to happen. We're going to lose the business. We're going to do this and this and this. And she just kept layering on all these worst case scenario things. And then at the end of the day, we actually got her to go through that same exercise and said, well, what if that does happen? And she realized that actually it wasn't that bad. So when you figure out that, hey, the worst case scenario is actually not that bad. I'm not going to be walking into an ambush, and be like, how the heck am I going to get myself out of here? It's not that bad. So I love the fact that you've done that. The other thing that I'm really interested in is how do you, because there's a component of this where it requires us to manage not just the tangible things, writing stuff down, but how do you then on a daily basis manage your mindset? How do you continue to do that, to continue to build that momentum?
Yeah. So one of the things that I took out of the Army was organization and sort of task focus. And so I took that same approach to building the business. I put together a year plan. In retrospect, the 20 plan was too detailed, and so the 21 plan was less detailed. And then every week, I sort of split my work. I'm a one person show. I've got a couple of subcontractors that help me out if I get too much work, but I'm a one person show, and so I have a quadrant of stuff that I work on marketing, a quadrant
Mm-hmm.
of stuff that I work as sort of the current business that I've got. I've got sales that I'm also working, and then I have sort of accounting and other stuff. You have to, as the one person shop, you've got to chase those companies that haven't paid you yet and see, hey, when are you
Mm-hmm.
guys going to actually send that payment that for that work that we did. And so each week I create a master list of stuff that has to sort of happen that week. And then every day I create a daily list of things that I've got to do. And I try to knock a couple things off every day and try to move the business forward that way. That works for me. Folks would probably say that I'm uber organized and sort of to that end of the spectrum, but that sort of works for me. And helps keep me on track and helps me move the business forward and keep that momentum going.
I'm totally all for the practicalness of things. I love lists and, being organized and that sort of stuff. So you're speaking my language when you talk about that sort of thing. So in terms of this whole concept of building grit, let's talk a little bit about that. What do you mean by somebody developing a level of grittiness about them?
Yeah, so let's take a step back and talk about grit for a second. So I define grit as the will to persevere to achieve long-term goals, and I acknowledge that for your Australian listeners, and if you've got anyone from the UK or New Zealand, grit is not a typical term. It's more of an American English term. But think persistence or perseverance is probably a good enough word. And it's that sort of skill in habit that helps you accomplish those long-term goals. And for some people, it may be graduating from high school, others graduating from college, and others, standing up a business, whatever that long-term goal is. And I had a lot of them, and I had to apply grit. And I'll talk a little bit about applying grit in combat because. So I deployed to Iraq in 2007 and 2008. It was part of the surge. It was a 15-month deployment. And I was the operations officer for a 3,500 person organization. And the operations officer is that person that coordinates and synchronizes all current operations and then also current plans and synchronizes all of the long range plans. And so there was a lot of work, and it was really a 6.5 day a week kind of job. About 18 hours a day. The couple highlights were getting an hour or two to go do some physical fitness and going to the meals with some of our colleagues. But it was hard work. And then you really had to sort of knuckle down and really sort of figure out what was our long-term goals, where were we trying to go, and then have that perseverance to get there. And then when the inevitable sort of short-term stuff came up, you had to have the discipline to deal with that and deal with that effectively, and then get yourself back on the path when, in our case, the enemy, the Al-Qaeda fighters that were operating in the Sunni area or the fighters that were operating in the Shia area inevitably would throw a wrench into the plans because they had other ideas on how things were supposed to go. And so when those wrenches inevitably came, you dealt with it, and then you tried to move the organization on to its longer term goals. Those kind of things is what really sort of built my grit. And fast forward to 2021, I'm talking with a client, and she was like, "Hey, you've got a lot of grit. Why don't you write a book on it?" And I had read, as you may have, Tracy, I don't know if you've read Angela Duckworth's book on grit. She's a psychology professor at the University of Pennsylvania here in the United States. She's got a huge TED Talk on it and wrote a great book on grit. And Angela does a phenomenal job of describing what grit is, who's got it, who doesn't, how you test for it. But I thought she fell a little bit short in developing a process for how you build your own personal grit. And for the entrepreneurs out there, I know you guys have a lot of grit, but there are some ideas that you can take and make your grit even better. And so I think grit is combined of 6 different things. The first one is purpose. The second one is goal setting. And we talked a little bit about that a second ago. Perseverance. Resilience, you have to be able to bounce back from the inevitable setback. Courage, and we talked a lot about that already. The courage, which is really dealing with your fears, managing your fears, because those are the things that inevitably hold us back. I don't know about you, but I find myself sometimes I procrastinate when sometimes I don't break a task down big into small enough chunks. It seems too daunting, it seems too big. You don't tackle those things. And so that's, to me, is how I manifest that fear in the business world. And then lastly, you got to figure out where your motivation's coming from. Some folks have it internally, and other folks need external motivation to help them achieve their long-term goals.
Mm-hmm. I want to ask a question about that motivation. So for you, being internal or external for you, and how do you use that to, like, how do you actually create the motivation, whether it's internal or external?
Yeah. So I have both. I have I'll tell you, this is more from my athletic side. So I'm a big cyclist, as you can see from behind me.
We can see, and people are saying, "Hey, I can see you've got some awesome bikes there. You're a mountain biker. I see the Specialized bikes behind you. Nice."
Yeah. So I'm a big cyclist, and I have a friend. If any of your listeners are on Zwift, which is it's a virtual world where you can ride on a smart trainer against other folks, and it's there's different badges that you win for riding different routes. And I have this friend that is a huge trash talker, and he actually has ridden and gotten 142 badges. I'm at 136 badges, and so that's one of those sort of extrinsic kind of things that drives me. But with the business, a lot of it is internal motivation. Part of it is that desire to provide for the family, to provide a comfortable lifestyle, and also for me, it's to help people with my executive coaching aspects of the business. I was surprised at how much reward I got out of working with these executives and being able to provide them new ideas, different approaches to how to deal with problems and tackle these things. And so that intrinsic piece, I think, is more powerful than the external stuff. But the external stuff is some people may count dollars, some people may count sales. Some people may count it, products shipped if they're in a product kind of business. But for me, it's that intrinsic piece that, hey, I want to make this thing successful. I want to be successful as I possibly can be, and then also that ability to help folks learn and grow, develop their grit, and accomplish their goals.
And so how do you take that kind of concept of, developing our own internal or personal grittiness, and then applying that to, say, a leader that then can disseminate that down to their team? Like, what are some of the processes or steps that you would take that would actually help a leader develop that within their team?
Well, I think one of the great questions to ask this leader is this hypothetical leader that we're talking about, is ask them, hey, have you asked your team what motivates them? And 9 times out of 10, they haven't really asked the team what resonates with them, because some folks need that external drive and look for that, monetary bonus or whatever. And a lot of times companies are structured to have that sort of extrinsic kind of thing. But I think if you really asked your team and really dug down into it, a lot of it is the intrinsic things that are there. Hey, they're trying to not let down the other people that are on the team, or they're trying to help the company be as successful as possible, or they want to be part of something that's bigger than themselves, like being part of this company. And I think that's really the first step for the leader is, have you really talked to your team and figured out what their motivation is? Because a lot of times the leader defaults to whatever drives them. And they may be hey, I need to get that bonus, I need to get that stock options kind of person. And they think everybody else in the team is driven that same way. But I think when they ask the question, they're sometimes a little bit surprised by the answers.
And I think the beautiful thing about, doing something like that, particularly when you're starting out or you're a much smaller company, is your ability to be able to, get close and ask those sorts of questions of your team that then actually become part of, maybe they just, you see them flow up into your mission statement or your vision statement. And once you can tie, the goals, the desires, the dreams, the aspirations of your team into that, you've then got a really strong ability to be able to create some momentum because they've got real buy-in to what it is that you are trying to achieve or what the company's trying to achieve.
Right. And even a bigger part of it is it can really influence the culture of these small teams. As they grow into a larger organization, these folks that are in at the ground level or, the first 10 employees can really influence the culture of that organization and can really set the tone for the next 10 years of that organization and how they recognize people and how folks are motivated to be successful and help the team achieve its goals.
And that's an interesting thing to think about, isn't it? That, those first few employees or team members that you have on board really set the foundation and it becomes part of the fabric of the company moving forward. And sometimes if, starting out, if you're not really thinking about that, I would say it's one of those moments where we need to think really carefully and put a lot of attention to that time where often entrepreneurs don't always do that. It's like, okay, who of my friends and family could help me out with this right now? Who's available? I can train somebody. And we don't always think about, I'm actually laying the foundations for something much, much bigger in the future. And if we actually thought about that at that time, just like you would if you were laying the foundations of a massive building that I'm looking at out my window, you've got something then that is rock solid that you continue to build upon. And the fabric of that has been built the way that you want it to be right from the get-go.
Yeah. No, great point. And, just to hear as we're talking about it, I'm like, man, I have this guy, Terrence, that works for me. I'm like, man, I gotta go talk to Terrence and make sure that he's on board because, it's one of those things where work comes in and you're like, oh, Terrence, can you help out? And, got to make sure that he's on board with building the culture of TFCG.
What do you like? I mean, again, this is just, I want to go back to sort of this whole concept of like building the grit,
Mm-hmm.
but in building that, and things don't always go right when we're building our own business, or you're an entrepreneur and you're starting out and you're doing new things, and you're putting time frames on stuff. What do you do when you are faced with a failure? Because things don't always go right? How do you sort of bounce back from that, and how do you address the maybe when you're looking at something that didn't go as well as you had hoped it would?
Yeah, what you're talking about is resiliency, the ability to bounce back from the inevitable setbacks. I think the first thing that most entrepreneurs figure out pretty quickly is that there's gonna be a setback. They hit it early on, they pivot, they restructure the business or do whatever, and learn that. One of the biggest things I think for individuals, especially the leaders of a company, is to make sure that they're taking care of themselves. For me, at least, as I look back over my last 30 years of working, making sure that I'm getting the number one thing, of course, is making sure that you're getting enough sleep. And because if you're not getting enough sleep, you're not going to make the best decisions when you're under stress or outside pressure. Making sure that you're eating right, and making sure that you're getting some physical fitness in, making sure that you're taking a few minutes to reflect, or mindfulness or meditation, whatever is your kind of thing to sharpen your mind. But those things, I think, help us as people to handle those inevitable setbacks better. It's not a magic, it's not a magic pill. But as I think, as you look back to your experience standing up businesses, I'm sure when you were strung out on 4 or 5 hours of sleep multiple nights in a row, you didn't handle that setback really well. You snap at people. I know I did. I know I still do. And so I work hard at trying to make sure I'm getting somewhere between 7 and 8 hours of sleep a night. I know that's not the entrepreneur hustle thing that everybody else is out there talking about. But I think that's where you really set yourself up for success, to handle these setbacks and handle these little obstacles that are going to happen when you're trying to start something from scratch.
Absolutely, and that's great advice. And you're right. Often people are talking about, you've got to hustle, hustle and grind and do whatever you can. And if it means that you've got to do all-nighters, then that's what you do. Do whatever it takes type mentality. And as in your conversation today, it's one of those things that we do need to take care of ourselves, because if you don't, that will be not very long lived. You can only do that for so long, and then all of a sudden you're not able to handle things as well as you would like to. The other thing I want to talk about is this concept of building courage. So let's talk about, in your mind, what is courage, and how does one develop that? Because often, we find that there's some amazing people out there. And I talk to a lot of people about, hey, starting your own show, because that's one of the things that myself and my business partner, Vicky Helm, do. We actually help people take their message and create their own live shows. But often we get from people, I'm too afraid to do that. I'm scared to do it. And even in the army, that takes a lot of courage to be able to do a lot of the things that are required of you to be able to see a mission through. How do you go about developing courage in yourself, and also helping other people around you develop the level of courage that they need to step outside their comfort zone?
Yeah, so let's talk about a second about how the Army deals with that with parachuting. The United States Army uses really a series of rituals, and also the power of the group to handle the fear of actually jumping out of a plane at 1,000 feet. And so the first thing that you do is you learn a whole series of rehearsals that have to happen before any time that you get any time that you exit an aircraft. And that includes learning, practicing how to fall down, practicing everything that's going to happen in the air, practicing sitting in the aircraft. And once you get all that done, you actually put the parachute on, and then you get inspected by a senior level parachutist that's gone through some extra classes to make sure that it's entirely safe and it's safe to jump. And so once again, another part of the ritual to get to handle that fear and make sure that you're comfortable with your equipment. Then you get on the plane. And when you get on the plane, the jump masters take over, and they use a series of commands that the entire plane echoes back. And so the jump master will say 10 minutes, and everybody goes 10 minutes. Then they say, get ready, and everybody says, get ready. And I'm doing the little arm motions here for anybody that can see it. And then they say, stand up, and everybody says, stand up. And then they say, hook up, and then you have to hook your static line on. But those series of commands and responses really helps you know that you've practiced it, you're executing it, and then everybody else is saying the words back. And so it's a power of the group. Now that doesn't work very well when you're standing up your own business. And I like to joke that, when I started my own business, I said, all right, 10 minutes. And I looked around my office, and my dog kind of looked at me strangely. And I said, get ready. And she kind of got excited because she thought that meant I was going to give her a treat. But it didn't help me manage my fears any better. And that's really what I consider courage. And we talked about a few of those things earlier here in the show. That idea of listing your fears and listing the mitigation, listing your fears, listing the worst thing that'll happen, and then the mitigation strategy that you're going to do it. And for instance, one of the ones that I had was like, okay, what happens if I don't make any money? And I did the math, and I'm like, okay, I'm probably out some savings on this year. I did my math, and I figured it was going to be somewhere between $50,000 and $70,000 if I wasn't successful. And I was like, okay, that's the worst that's going to happen, right? I track my money. I make sure that I don't inject more than that into the business. And that's kind of my strategy to deal with that fear. And just like that person that you were talking to, once you put it on paper and you figure out that it's not that bad, you can handle it and you can manage it and you can go, okay, we're only going to spend $10,000 a quarter, and we'll see if we can make this thing go.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like you then get to the point where, okay, I'm relaxed, I'm comfortable, I can deal with this. One of the things about, I suppose, the space of entrepreneurship and you talking about, all right, I've learned some of muscle memory, I've learned some of these rituals that I should do to kind of get me started. And I was having a little bit of a giggle to myself because, even before the show, I mean, those sorts of things are the sorts of things that I do. All right, it's 10 minutes, and you get yourself into a bit of a rhythm and a routine because when you get that rhythm and routine, that builds the courage, to build your confidence, and makes you a lot more relaxed whenever it is that you're going into, to do whatever it is that you're going to be doing. But in terms of, that for an entrepreneur and somebody who's doing it on their own and maybe not having a team around them, a couple of things I just wanted to just give inject a bit of advice here, which is, one is that piece that David was talking about, often just practicing behind the scenes in the mirror on your own, doing the stuff that you are going to be doing just in private, so that you get comfortable with it and you build up, I'm going to say, some form of muscle memory that your body says, it's actually okay. I've been there. I've done this before and it didn't kill me. So, I'm going to be okay with it. And the second is to find some people that, you can surround yourself with, that are going to be your wingman, your wingwoman, and cheer you on, and be those people that are going to echo back to you, you're doing a good job. All right, you got 10 minutes, let's go, those sorts of things. And often that's the sort of stuff that is not seen by the outside world for entrepreneurs. And I know for me that I have that around me. I could talk about Vicky. Her and I will do that sort of stuff, behind the scenes with one another. It might be before a show, it might be before we're going into a big training, or, any of that, or doing something that's a little bit outside of our own, we're learning something new outside of our comfort zones. We get ourselves into a bit of a rhythm and a routine, and we can echo back to one another and be that support network that is padding us should either of us ever fall. And that's exactly what you guys were doing, when you're in an aircraft, and getting everybody prepared. So I love, there's so many things that I think from the Army's standpoint that can be taken from there, because it's a high risk, highly stressful environment, that can be mapped over into the entrepreneurial space to really help entrepreneurs, business owners, corporate executives, really build the level of grit that they need to be able to deliver and achieve any goal that they set.
Right. I was actually, as you were talking, I was wondering what's your morning ritual that gets you going, because I'm sure you do the same. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, my morning is probably, and again, you say, oh, hustle and grind. My mornings are really the morning that is the time that I catch up. I like to, be on my own. I generally don't talk to a lot of people first thing in the morning, but what I will do is, that's when I'm, sort of scanning what's gone on in the day, what are my emails. And a lot of people would say, don't do that. But I find that's what works for me. That's what gets me going and enables me. And then I come and sit and I'll do a bit of, working out what am I doing, in my day. And hold my book up. I'm a checklist person. I don't know how many of these books I have got, in my drawer. My thoughts go in the thoughts go in there, the actions of the day, and I'm very much a tick list type of person that likes to tick off so I can see what I have achieved. And it's interesting because, you're talking about creating these lofty goals often, and we're thinking, God, I'm looking at that and I'm like, how the heck am I going to tackle that? And we often underestimate how much we actually can achieve by just breaking that down into smaller bite-sized chunks or small steps and just doing one thing at a time. And that then, getting us through here. Vicky saying, yes, you are a checklist person. I totally am. And I do that with with everything. Doesn't matter if going to the shops, I'll get the checklist. I'm looking at my fridge, get the checklist off the fridge because I'll sit down and write that, because otherwise I forget. Because particularly as an entrepreneur, you got a million and one things sort of racing around in your head. And I'm interested to see how you even deal with this. We've got lots of things going on. You go to bed at nighttime and you've still got these things running around in your head. How do you then take the things that are constantly running around in your head, compartmentalize them, so to speak, but then be able to pick them back up again and do something with them? Do you have a process of doing that?
Yeah, the number one thing that has helped me the most with that, and compared to other entrepreneurs, I don't have problems falling asleep. My mind isn't, and I put it all back on this idea. So when I get to the end of the day, no matter what time that is, I write the list for the next day, and I try to write down everything I do in that. And then once I have that list down, it sort of gives me a framework, and then I'll kind of I'll watch TV or read a book or get ready, or even just get ready for bed. And occasionally another idea or two will pop in, but as long as I go write that idea down, I'm good. And
Yeah.
when I get up the next morning, that list is there, and I'm ready to go, and I'm going to try to tackle some of them. I may not get to all of them, but I'll get to some of them. I do want to jump on a little bit about what you said about goal setting, and two things that I talked to both other entrepreneurs about and also the executives that I coach. So the first thing is breaking down the big goals into small goals, and you talked about that. But that really, as I watch myself continue to work, and I watch these executives work, breaking that goal down into smaller sub-steps makes it manageable, and makes it not as daunting. And then the second and two other things. The second most important thing is to actually put those goals or sub-steps on the calendar. Because if you don't take that second step and take it from that piece of paper and actually carve out time on the calendar to actually do it, it's probably not going to happen, because it's going to get overwhelmed by answering emails or making phone calls or working on your webpage or whatever that you've got going. And those two things really are the biggest things that I think hold folks back from goal setting. And then the third and last one is this idea is you also have to be intellectually honest with yourself about what's got to come off the calendar in order to accomplish that goal. Because most of these gritty goals that people are laying out are huge, and folks will be like, "Oh, I'm just going to work harder." And I'm like, "All right, you're fooling yourself. You've got this huge goal to turn around your business or increase profit margins by 100% with some of these executives that I'm working with, and yet you're not willing to take anything off the calendar to carve out that time for this new thing that's going to happen." Because I know you're busy, Tracy. I'm busy. There's no way that I can take on a big project without figuring out what's got to come off the project or off the current calendar to make space for that to happen.
And that's a really, really good point of, you can't just keep loading on more and more and more and more. And often, as you've pointed out today, business owners, entrepreneurs say, yeah, just load it on. We can handle that next thing and that next thing and that next thing. And all that happens then is you end up being burnt out. One of the skills, I think, that comes with, being a business owner and entrepreneur is that ability to be able to say no to things, be able to go, okay, well, this is the path that I'm on. I become laser focused. I'm going to have the grit and determination to get there, but to get there, I have to carve out some time and some, capacity, space, whatever it is, to actually achieve that. Because if you don't, more than likely you're going to fall short, because you've set yourself up for failure.
Right. There's only 24
Mm,
hours in the day, right? And
yeah.
so that, like you said, the ability to say no is challenging because there's going to be a lot of opportunities that come at you as an entrepreneur that you might not have thought about. And you've got to
Mm,
decide, hey, is that, does that sort of resonate with my core business? Does that sort of complement it? Is that a pivot? And then sometimes there's things that folks throw at you that are completely out in left field that I've had to say, hey, that sounds like a great idea, but that's really not something that I think I can help you with because I don't have the time or bandwidth to deal with it.
mm. Well, I want to, look, what a great conversation we've had today about, building that personal grit. And I want to let everybody know, I mean, as you heard David talking, he mentioned that he had written a book. And if you look very carefully, you'll see it right behind him, very perfectly placed on the bookshelf back there, grit.
You're the first
And I
person
want
to pick up on that, Tracy. So congratulations.
there you go. All right. Well, I can see it's absolutely right there. So I just want to let everybody know where they can go if you would like to get a copy of David's book. So you can head on over to, let me just pop it up on the screen. So www.thefivecoatconsultinggroup.com/books. If you head on over there, you can get a ebook or the physical copy of David's book. And don't forget, when you do get his book and you read it, given that, being an author and Vicky and I writing a number of books together, people writing reviews is very, very important and extremely helpful. So if you have an opportunity to get a copy of his book and you read it and you love it, please make sure that you also head on back to Amazon and you give David the review that he deserves. And secondly, if you want to learn more about David and what he actually does, you can also head on over, let me just hide this one, you can head on over to fivecoatconsultinggroup.com. Do you just want to tell us, what sort of clientele would normally come to you, David? So if who is your ideal client?
Yeah, so a couple of different clients. So for executive coaching, I tend to work with executives in established businesses, whether it's Fortune 500 or privately owned companies. But usually they have a significant amount of direct reports and a significant line of business that they have to deal with. Those are the folks that I've had the most success with and really have enjoyed. I've also worked with a couple of folks in startups that are still in their Series D round, and that's been enjoyable too as they grapple with a completely different set of problems from the folks that are in the established business. And then also I do some talks with groups. Either I do a talk on grit, either developing personal grit or developing organizational grit. And then I've done some stuff that I've taken from the Army where I help folks build a planning SOP and facilitate them using that planning and decision-making SOP to make business decisions. And then also I've done some work helping folks do an after-action review, which is a military debrief or post-mortem from a project. It's a great way to get folks to talk, build a culture that's an inclusive culture where folks' voices are heard, and gets folks to acknowledge what they did right and what they could do better the next time the business has that same kind of project.
Well, I love that. Well, there you go, guys. So if any of you are in that space and you need some assistance from David, head on over to fivecoatconsultinggroup.com and connect with David, and you can continue to have this conversation. So I want to say thanks very much for being here today. I want to ask you one question before we do wrap up today's conversation, and that is, I want to know what, if you could turn back time. Let's go back to maybe when you're in your teens. What is the one piece of advice that you would go back and give yourself now that would be relevant for other entrepreneurs to hear?
Wow, that's that one's interesting. So I guess the biggest challenge there would be willing to take risks. Sometimes in my military career, I didn't take. I took risks in combat, but as far as career progression, I didn't take some risks that perhaps maybe I should have. Now looking back on the career, where I might have done some things like I tell my daughter, we never got stationed at any of the good places. We never got to go to Hawaii. We never. DC was nice, but we didn't get it at any of the garden spots that the Army has, or Germany, or Italy, or any place like that. And so take some risks, take more risks, and it's okay that you can become an entrepreneur when you're 49, because that's when I founded my business, and it's never too late to start, and take that risk, and deal with your fears, and take that leap and become an entrepreneur.
Well, I love that. And thank you. That leads right into, the whole philosophy of the Unlocked Show, and that is to live your life unlocked with nothing holding you back, experiencing, everything you possibly can in this lifetime. So I want to congratulate you for, taking that leap of faith, really being willing to accept some risk and step into the entrepreneurial space, because we need loads and loads of people like you to help to help this world. So thank you very much for being here. It's been a fantastic conversation chatting with you. I could talk all day about what it is that you've been up to in the Army, and how you're some of the combats that you've been on, but maybe we'll leave that for another day. But thank you very much for being a fantastic guest. And for those of you that are watching today, thank you for being here. You guys know where to go and get a copy of David's book. The fivecoatconsultinggroup.com/books is where you can get a copy of the book, and you also know where you can connect with David so you can continue this conversation. Thanks so much for being here. You guys know that I'll be back again on Friday with another episode of The Unlocked Show, 10 a.m. Brisbane time, and then again next Wednesday. Until then, go ahead, live your life unlocked, because you guys know there is just no other way. Thanks, and have a fantastic week, and I'll see you guys again on Friday. Bye for now.